Well, I'd like to welcome you again to Health Coach Seven's webinar broadcast, and we're about a week late on this postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, as well as PANDAS and P.A.N.D.A.S and autoimmune related relationships and in methylation and DNA cycling. And of course, all of this information is very technical and maybe difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible to try to give you a overview and relationships of how methylation is affected with regards to different type of exposures or disease processes that do occur. So up on the screen here, um, you may see that I have a real valuable database. It's called Malacards, and you can actually look up any disease process in Malacards and actually explore their genetic relationships. And it's a very good, I would say, inner reference type of online service that you can actually do more research on. As you know, we've been covering a lot of methylation relationships, including methylation in cancer, methylation in various types of uh, uh, regular health. We covered methylation in inflammation. So, I mean, going back to, you'll see these being reposted because a lot of people have been really appreciating the information in these methylation series. So you'll be seeing them again. And of course, you've probably seen Putting Bad Genes on Good Behavior, which is a book I'm working on currently to outline the importance of understanding epigenetic adaptation in favor of preserving health. So everything that we're doing here and trying to outline for you is to actually assist in understanding how it applies to functional health and how we can actually maybe change the picture, which is a sometimes very complicated process. All right, so here what we have on the screen is we have, as you can see, post-postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, P.O.T.S, which this is actually categorized as a rare disorder, but it's interesting because I have seen a number of cases through the years of P.O.T.S, and a lot of the times we want to know what the primary exposure is that might cause such a disorder as this. And as you can see here, P.O.T.S is known as a disorder that affects blood pressure and blood volume, and it's also characterized by a lot of different type of symptoms, including symptoms of faintness, lightheadedness, slower heart rate, associated even with chronic fatigue syndrome, as you can see is noted on this reporting system here. And a lot of the times, what we wind up seeing is it's actually coexistent with some kind of an autoimmune disorder of some sort. So there's some kind of a process with the immune system relationship. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, there's an autoimmune component. And sometimes you can actually see P.O.T.S along with PANDAS and P.A.N.D.A.S and autoimmunity, as I had just mentioned. It is considered a rare disease, and actually you can see here in the related disease profiles of different things, including inflammatory diseases of the nervous system, autonomic dysfunction that can actually be caused by autoimmunity in the what they call peripheral nervous system, central nervous system. And then again here, chronic fatigue syndrome is listed, the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and Lyme disease, migraine, chronic migraine. So there's a lot of relationships here with the postural orthostatic syndrome. Now, when we're actually looking at this and we want to see how does it relate to methylation cycle, well, there's a lot of different genes that are actually expressing in the cycling here. So if we actually go to wanting to know what genes would be involved, if you ever had your 23andMe data analyzed, you're going to notice that there's a lot of different immune components that are involved. So if you looked at, for instance, the complement factor could be involved. There could be various type of ACE, which is angiotensin converting enzyme. You can see CTLA4. You can see TACR1. You could see some transport mechanisms being affected, like folate transport, which would involve, the methylation cycle. There's a lot of different involvement. So when we're talking about DNA methylation, again, what we're saying is how regular is the DNA reproducing in its architecture in a very reliable, healthy fashion. So if we actually have DNA that's not on the regular in actual double-stranded architecture, and we start seeing that DNA is actually beginning to have insertions of different nucleotides that might affect the positioning and movement of healthy cell cycling. I mean, there's various type of things that can occur here. So DNA methylation is going to be affected by various types of disorders. So a lot of the time what we discover is that the methylation cycle will actually begin to try to auto-regulate itself. First, it's kind of like a swinging pendulum, if you will. You get exposed to something, or you have some kind of a sensitivity, susceptibility. You get hit, and then the pendulum swings, and before it hits the center mark in methylation, there's a whole sequence of events that is occurring, and they get all these symptoms that are manifest associated with the shifting of what's happening. So, for instance, if the immune system is involved, if there's inflammatory cycling, if there's a bunch of different type of imbalances in the hormone regulation, you're going to see these type of changes in P.O.T.S. So DNA methylation is important in the regulatory aspect of trying to correct adaptive signals. However, the primary symptom presentation, there's usually the reason why they call it a syndrome is because there's really not a specific cause that has been identified to cause this dysregulation. And as I mentioned, several genes could be involved in regulating vessel tone and blood volume, et cetera, which include the immune system, which includes the vessel signaling system, which, for instance, ACE is one of those, aldosterone system, any of the hormones that are controlled by that kind of movement there. So again, when we talk about the autonomic regulation, it's a very big schematic if you're looking at it. So it starts off with of course, the brain, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and then you've got the thyroid axis, the adrenal, the gonads, all of these different glands that interface. And your CNS, P.A.N.S regulation and regulating heart rate, blood volume, and hormonal controls are very complex. So this is not an easy problem to figure out. And that's why I say if autoimmunity is the key, or a related other disease consequence that might be causing these concerns. So you have to be looking at all of those things. You just can't say, hey, I have P.O.T.S. It's just a syndrome. There are causative factors in it, and as you saw there, Lyme disease actually comes up as in the top percent score for related disease. Now, Pandas is a very interesting, again, classified as a rare neurological disease that could be associated with bacterial infection, and of course, Pandas specifically for streptococcal infections. But if you actually look at P.A.N.S, P.A.N.S, you're going to find that, okay, there might be some other exposures that might be associated with, the changes in autoimmune expressions that affect the neurological system. Okay, so basically what Pandas is, it's a autoimmune related disease that actually is caused by a streptococcal infection, which is a bacterium. But as I said, there could be other associated exposures like virus and other bacterium, not just strep. But you can see here that there is involvement genetically with a couple of other classifications, like the cystic fibrosis transporter receptor (CTFR). That is actually a mutation that's seen, and you can see mutations on FSHB. And there's different relationships here. If you looked in detail, with maybe other associated autoimmune issues that could be affecting skin, brain, and bone as well. So now, if you looked at related diseases, you could see a couple of different type of disease patterns that might be related. They all have some kind of an autoimmune effect on the nervous system. And you can actually look at other issues here, and there's a lot of related articles that talk about different mutations involved with COMT. You can see that primary structure of COMT gene that's involved in that regulatory movement, and how that's trying to regulate. If you see, remember, COMT is actually one of the main regulators of methylation cycle, so you can see how the methylation would be affected with COMT's involvement. But you can actually do a more in-depth study on COMT's involvement, as well as other genes that are profiled in pandas. And if you actually look at the networking of the diseases that have been outlined here, you can see Lyme disease is part of that. Anorexia is part of that. Neuroendocrine involvement, any kind of neuroendocrine auto-inflammatory disease process, and even including various type of cancers that might be related. So when we're talking about pandas, we can actually see also some other related genetics associated with various antibody, genetic stimulated antibody. These are all the FSHB, the CRYAB. So you can see the list here. These are genes to explore, of course. And then when we actually looked at the P.O.T.S, and we wanted to see any related gene relationships there when we had this up just a minute ago. Let's see here. Where did it go? We actually, well, I don't know. Let's see. I think it right behind there. There it is right there. When we're actually looking at P.O.T.S and we're trying to see if there are any kind of related disturbances in the genetics, as you can see, we don't really have a lot. You can go under gene cards and actually see maybe some other information that might present, but obviously what it's doing is it's just pulling up a general reference window, so it's not really telling us a whole lot there. So a lot of the times you don't see a lot of genetics associated with P.O.T.S because it's a syndrome being listed. What you'll see is related type of disease expressions that list the genes. And I hope that this does not confuse you, but what I've been seeing on various analyses of different patients is that P.O.T.S, and there's a lot of ACE involvement, ACE, a lot of TACR1 involvement. There is also a methylation, various methylation genes that are disturbed as well. So you can see some of the relationships there that they're not listing here because there's probably not stronger weight of evidence to tie them in. You have to look at the other disease processes that might be causing the syndrome, in other words, to be able to get the gene associations. And I'm giving you a few of those that you've probably seen on your genetic report. And there's a lot more. Besides the ones that I mentioned, there's probably about a good 20 to 25 different genes that actually come up that might be affected either heterozygous or homozygous results. So you got to be looking at the data and see the correlations between the different genes. And what their relationships are and in function with regards to regulating certain controls that you see manifested here that are affected by the postural orthostatic tachycardia. So now in the pandas, however, what we did see is we actually saw that the uh, the relationship here to other genes are present. Okay, and you saw CTFR as CFTR, I mean, as one of those, as well as these other genes that are listed. And you're going to see that as you cross-reference and you get into this disorder more, you're going to find that there are other related gene controls present. Um, so here's an interesting article back in 2012. It's talking about supplemental iodine as a key to reproduction in pandas. Like in other words, that particular study is actually showing the relationship of iodine deficiency. So that's one there that's pretty interesting. This one here, number 5, is actually a fairly new article. It's actually talking about the streptococcal relationship in more the effects of this perianal strep that in this particular case, and shows you how it gives you a good case analysis there. And then several of these articles you may want to be looking at because I think you'll find that a lot of them are something that might give you more information. Okay, so on the genes that are related to pandas, as you can see, there's 10 of them here that are really strong weight of evidence that's there. And you're going to see various type of peptides that actually regulate, or proteins regulate DNA. So ribosomal protein and protein development. There's FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, CEA. There's also the natriuretic peptide A, which actually is very important. And if you look at that gene specifically, you're going to find that gene is a regulatory gene that's very important in maintaining fluid volume, so control of extracellular fluid volume. So then, an electrolyte homeostasis. So that's a very important one, because if you go back to that, right, you can see how it might be related to P.O.T.S. then, because of the NPPA gene association, right? So if you've got an electrolyte imbalance and you've got a fluid volume imbalance, you're going to find that you might have associated P.O.T.S. that has been triggered by the Pandas, right? So these are the relationships that I'm talking about that you just can't, with the syndrome is usually attached to another disease process, or an inflammatory process, or an autoimmune process. It could be based on some exposure. It could be based on, dysregulatory mechanisms of the immune system. So very important to be looking at. And the DNA methylation cycle is going to be affected one way or another. So you're either going to have a hyperexpressed methylation or an underexpressed methylation. It can go both ways. And of course, you can try to address methylation, but my philosophy and theory is that it would be best to address the associated cause and identify the cause and begin the process of addressing it clinically, and then concomitantly working on methylation to gently nudge better adaptation mechanisms. So DNA methylation is not a cycle that you can influence readily, okay? Because you remember the human genome has has its own sensitivity, susceptibility, strengths, and weaknesses. The DNA methylation cycle is controlled by these genetic signals, either for whatever those regulatory mechanisms are in the cells. Okay, every cell regulates at its rate. So you're going to find that to try to address methylation is a very complex sea that you're not really going to affect. Methylation cycle is not something that is easily corrected. Okay, if there are disturbances, and usually the body is actually really good at trying to adapt against certain adverse factors it's exposed to, including like in chronic viral related autoimmune disease, for instance, or if you're exposed to some kind of a spirochete, or various type of autoimmune expression that's caused by mycotoxins, molds, etc. you have all of these things that are actually working in conjunction that can actually facilitate things like PANDAS and P.A.N.D.A.S and cause syndromes like P.O.T.S. So you could see how difficult it could be from a clinician standpoint to try to address these things, because they have to identify causative factors first. What is the cause? You got to find what the cause is, and it takes some detective work to do that. So, like, in other words, it's not just a good thing to address P.O.T.S. Like a lot, the therapy that's out there now is by helping with blood volume regulation, and you can do various type of intravenous support to help with P.O.T.S. and helping with blood volume regulation, as well as better signaling for the heart and vessels and tone of those vessels. But if there is an exposure of some sort that hasn't been identified, you actually have a cyclical movement that causes the syndrome. And unless you actually identify what the cause is and try to work at trying to correct those mechanisms that are accelerating it, then you're going to have the continued manifestation of the syndrome that you see in P.O.T.S. And as I showed you here, in this Pandas with the NPPA association, you can see that there's a relationship there, and just one of those genes can actually relate to the actual control of what they call homeostasis in the cardiovascular tone, heart rate, and blood volume. So I hope that you can see those relationships. And when we actually talk about autoimmune disease, we're talking about a very, I would say, extensive uh, amount of different autoimmune diseases that are out there. So I just actually plugged into Malacards and just looked up autoimmunity, and it comes up with 1,422 hits. So autoimmune disease actually can hit any section of the body, any segment of the body, and if you actually looked at these disease processes in details, you're going to see the associated genes that are actually involved. You would actually see cross-related genes involved, and you might even see that there are similar genes involved in each one of these different categories of autoimmunity. Okay, what triggers the autoimmunity could be various type of things: environmental factors, hereditary factors, exposures, virus, fungus, bacterium, various types of chemical sensitivities. And there's a whole mess of these things. And if your body doesn't have the good adaptation bounce back, then you can stay in an autoimmune progression for quite some time. If not, many people have suffered with autoimmunity for decades and never have cleared the process. And a lot of people have experienced relief by measures they've taken functionally, and a lot of people who have done their genetics, who understand this more, have been more targeted in how they address certain type of symptom components with the autoimmunity. And I can't tell you how many countless people I've been working with that have been getting significantly better because of the fact that they have a better blueprint to work with. And that's why these genetics are so important. But anyway, I just wanted to say, this is a very complex type of presentation. DNA methylation is a consequence that actually happens by the exposures, and you have to address the exposure and keep DNA methylation cycle in mind, but not as a primary focus. Making sure that you realize that the genetics and adaptability and epigenetics it requires a lot of strategic movement in clinically being able to receive the results and overcoming these various type of presentations. So I hope you find this useful, and I hope that if you have your genetics, your raw data, I would really strongly encourage you to go to www.healthcoach7.com, all one word, healthcoach7, the number 7.com. I'm Dr. John Catanzaro. You've probably heard me on other methylation webinars. And I look forward to answering any questions that you might have regarding this. You can always send that to info@healthcoach7.com, info@healthcoach7.com. And then we're going to continue a series. It's called Gene Crosstalk, Gene by Gene, where we're actually going to cover the strong weight of evidence genes and their relationship in functional health. And you'll get to see how certain genes relate to each other in certain processes. So look forward to that. I'll be covering that, and that's going to be an ongoing series, as well as particular disease entities of focus. I'll be actually doing that in between. So we'll be focusing in on a disease. We would focus in on the SNPs associated with it and how the genes cross relate as well. So look forward to those two things coming up. And again, we give a plug in for a book that's going to be coming out soon, Putting Bad Genes on Good Behavior. It's actually how to protect my DNA. And you'll find that it's going to be a very informative work, a very good ground substance to build upon. And I look forward to getting it out there soon. Well, thank you for your time and attention, and I hope to be able to work with you in the future. Look forward to future broadcasts that are coming. All right. Have a good day. Bye bye.